He burst out laughing and threw an ice-cold glass of soda straight at her, as the entire table laughed along. The liquid soaked through her white uniform, running down her back like a cold slap to her dignity. Yet no one stepped in. Not a single person. Just because she was a waitress, a nobody in this glittering world. Amber tilted the tray just enough to keep the wine from spilling as her other hand pushed open the double doors to the grand ballroom. Crystal lights reflected off hundreds of champagne glasses like shattered glass, blindingly bright. Tonight's event was one of the biggest her restaurant had ever hosted, drawing in all kinds of people, CEOs, finance elites, a few celebrities, and of course, those self-obsessed show-offs. She'd been doing this job for over 3 years, here at a luxurious fine dining restaurant on the west side of the city, a place where every dish was a piece of art. And every bill could cover her rent for an entire month. Amber was no stranger to being invisible. Guests spoke around her as if she didn't exist, or more accurately, as if she were part of the decor. Like a table, or a chandelier. Sometimes, they did look at her, but not like you look at another person. More like inspecting the quality of a service item. And tonight, it seemed she would have to endure even more than usual. At VIP table number 9, the one near the stage, a group of 5 young men dressed like they'd just stepped out of a magazine were loudly chatting and downing drinks non-stop. They'd just closed some real estate deal. Amber didn't care. But the way they laughed too loudly, slapped each other's backs, and summoned staff like calling for a pet, told her immediately. This was the kind of table she dreaded most. "Oh, finally, the lady arrives," one of them said, voice hovering between playful and condescending. He wore a black suit, shirt unbuttoned 3 down, with a watch so massive it caught the light like a mirror. Amber gave her professional smile. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" "I need one thing," another guy said as he poured himself more wine. "Can you actually smile? Like, a real smile? Not that robot mode." She kept smiling, the kind of smile she had practiced thousands of times in the mirror. "You know," the third guy said, eyes shamelessly scanning her body, "I like people who know how to stay quiet, people who know their place." Amber drew a slow breath and said nothing. She laid fresh napkins on the table, leaned in to refill their glasses. She was used to being teased. But with this table, it was different. The cruelty wasn't in their words. It was in how delighted they were to make her uncomfortable. "Are those real Pradas?" One of them pointed at her shoes. "Or like premium knockoffs from some street market?" They burst into laughter. "What a shame. With your salary, you'd need 6 months just to afford the heel of my girlfriend's shoes." Amber still said nothing. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. But every word they spoke was like acid, dripping slowly onto the dignity she had fought for years to protect. Then came the one line that made her freeze. "There are people who are poor because they haven't had the chance yet, and then there are people who are poor because their minds are pathetic." "Which one are you, Amber?" She didn't know which one of them said it. All she knew was that something inside her suddenly went silent. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs. Her mouth went dry. Her hand trembled. They knew her name. They read her name tag like it was part of some cheap joke, like she was just a character in a pointless comedy they were already bored of watching. Amber gave a faint nod, forcing down the burning lump in her throat. She turned to leave. Behind her, laughter broke out again. Glasses clinked, and one of them called after her. "Hey, waitress, don't be sad. At least you're prettier than tonight's appetizer." She quickened her steps toward the back, hiding her face from the other tables. Shame was nothing new. But this time, what hurt wasn't humiliation, it was helplessness. No one stood up for her. No one defended her. She was just a waitress. In a world where people could degrade you in public and fear no consequence. No one knew what was going through Amber's head at that moment, only that she kept her composure, just like every other time. She returned to that VIP table with another tray of drinks, following protocol, sticking to the shift routine. No arguing, no reaction. She wasn't allowed to make a mistake. But this time, they didn't just want entertainment. They wanted a public humiliation. Amber stepped forward, tilting the bottle of red wine to pour. The bottle had barely touched the rim of the glass, when smack, something ice-cold blasted straight across her chest. A glass of carbonated water thrown from close range. Not an accident. Not clumsy. Deliberate, precise, aiming right at her. The sound wasn't loud, but the soft "oh" that rippled from the nearby tables was. A strange, heavy silence suddenly settled over the area. Eyes turned toward her, and then laughter. From that exact table, loud, chaotic, delighted, as if they'd just witnessed a private joke only they understood. "See? Told you, just slipped a little," one of them said, acting innocent. "Relax, waitress, it's just soda." "Yeah, the good kind, won't even stain." They laughed again, louder, longer. Her white uniform was soaked, her chest was freezing, but her heart was burning. And somewhere behind her, clear as day, she heard someone quietly say, "She deserved it." No one stood up. No one said, "That's enough." Not a single glance signaled, "Stop." Most stayed silent. A few clicked their tongues, some lowered their eyes to their plates like nothing had happened. Why? Because it was the VIP table. Because of money. Because of power. Because they believed a waitress wasn't worth defending. Amber's manager, he was only a few meters away. He definitely saw. But the first thing that flashed across his face wasn't outrage, it was fear. Not fear for Amber, but fear that the VIP table might be upset. Amber stood there for barely 3 seconds. But every second felt like it was burning away a piece of her dignity she had fought to protect all these years. She didn't cry, at least, not yet. She only set the wine bottle down a little more gently than usual, gave a robotic nod, and turned to walk away. She heard one of them call out behind her, a final jab, sharp like a blade. "See that?" She doesn't even dare react. Then laughter. Then the clinking of glasses, as if they'd just won some cruel bet. Amber walked quickly past the rows of tables, refusing to look at anyone, refusing to hear anything. But her senses were painfully sharp. The sticky smell of soda soaked into her clothes, the cold, wet fabric clinging unpleasantly to her skin, and her heartbeat, wild, not from fear, but from a fury so strong it felt suffocating. Only when she reached the shadowed corner, leading into the staff area, did her breath catch. Her composure finally slipped. Her hand instinctively clutched the soaked front of her uniform. Tears fell. Not from pain, but from humiliation, from being treated like entertainment, from being regarded as trash, from standing in a luxurious room full of people, and realizing not a single one believed she deserved to be treated like a human being. She could no longer hear the music, the laughter outside. Only the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding like it wanted to tear out of her chest. In that moment, Amber understood something brutally simple. People like her were not allowed to make mistakes, not allowed to fight back, not allowed to have pride. If she wanted to survive, she had to swallow everything down. No tears in front of them. No letting them see her break. Amber quickly wiped her face, took a deep breath, and a decision flashed in her mind. She wasn't going to run. She would finish her shift. Because she needed the money, she had to keep going. But in her tear-reddened, now icy eyes, something had changed. She didn't know that. At that very moment, someone quietly stood up and left the party, not out of discomfort, but because he had seen everything. And he was not the kind of man who would let this go. The echoes of laughter still lingered as Amber disappeared behind the staff doors. Outside, the ballroom slipped right back into its glamorous rhythm. A few fleeting glances were exchanged, a few whispers passed like a breeze. Then people resumed slicing their steak, clinking their glasses, talking business. No one spoke up, no one mentioned what had just happened. Except one man. At table number 4, near the window overlooking the artificial lake outside, sat a man who hadn't moved since the beginning of the night. He wasn't a regular here, yet no one in the restaurant dared approach to ask if he needed anything. They didn't need to. No one dared get too close. The man wore a deep crimson velvet coat, a color only a few could pull off without looking ridiculous. His black hair streaked faintly with gray at the temples, a clean-shaven jaw, eyes sharp enough to cut. But what truly unsettled people were the tattoos covering both his arms, faintly visible beneath the sleeves of a white dress shirt casually rolled up. His name was Caleb Vaughn. No one knew his real age, but from the way he sat, unconcerned and emotionless, people instinctively understood. This was someone you did not mess with. Rumor in the logistics world said Caleb controlled most of the southern city's transport network, whether through contracts or through a kind of power nobody wanted to understand too deeply. No one dared call him Mafia, but no one dared call him a businessman either. He was simply Caleb Vaughn, and that alone was enough. From his seat, Caleb had a clear view of the entire scene. Amber being splashed with water. He didn't frown, didn't speak, didn't even shift in his chair. but his gaze locked onto the VIP table like a razor-edged blade. Silent, precise, unreadable. He didn't look at the spilled drink, nor at the men laughing like hyenas. The only thing he watched was the expression on the waitress's face. The way she said nothing, the way she didn't fight back, the way she walked away with her back still straight, even drenched, humiliated, freezing. The way an entire room turned its back on her, and she still didn't let a single tear fall in front of them. Caleb lifted his wine glass to his lips, but didn't drink. Not because the wine wasn't good, but because he was thinking. He knew men like those at the VIP table, had seen hundreds of their kind in closed-door meetings, in off-the-record parties, in deals where money was the only religion. The type who got rich young, wore power like a prop, believed they stood above everyone, simply because no one had ever taught them a lesson. But tonight, that lesson wasn't for them. Tonight, the person who caught his attention was her. No one noticed when Caleb set his wine glass down and stood. He didn't call for a waiter, didn't offer thanks, didn't ask for the bill. He walked out of the ballroom as if he had never been there at all. Silent, unhurried. The glass doors closed behind him. Not a single person turned to look. But in Caleb's mind, the name Amber was already clear. Even though he hadn't heard her speak, hadn't bothered to check her name tag. Just from the way she stood, the way she stayed silent, the way she held herself when most would have bowed their heads or broken down. Just one moment, and it was enough for a man like Caleb Vaughn to remember. Not because she was pitiful, but because she was different. A black car parked by the curb came to life as Caleb approached. The driver hurried to open the rear door, but Caleb raised a hand. "No need. Where to, sir?" "To the main plant," Caleb replied curtly, his eyes still on the restaurant's entrance. A thin stream of cigarette smoke drifted inside the car. He didn't smoke often, but the rare times he did meant his mind was rearranging things. A man like Caleb didn't operate on emotions, but he trusted instinct. And tonight, instinct was crystal clear. Do not underestimate that girl. Amber never saw the man in the crimson coat leave the party. She had no idea his gaze had stayed on her for far longer than she would ever imagine. To her, that night ended like a silent wound, one that didn't bleed, but echoed in her chest for days after. She kept going to work as usual, still carried trays, still greeted guests with the practiced smile. With her co-workers, Amber never mentioned what happened that night, and none of them asked, partly out of discomfort, but mostly because they were too used to this kind of silent endurance. She didn't blame them. In a place like this, the ones who survived were the ones who knew when to stay quiet. But at night, when she took off her apron, washed her hands, and looked at herself in the mirror, the ache was still there. Not from being splashed with water, but from the fact that in that entire room, not a single person spoke up. She used to believe that if she just lived decently, did her job well, the world would leave her alone. But that night, the world showed her the truth. No one leaves the weak alone. They only spare you for now, if they find you not worth stepping on again. And even though she was used to being looked down on, she had never felt this small before. At the same time, in another world, a world where numbers determined fate, where the real laws weren't written in books, Caleb Vaughn began to move. No noise, no threats. No men sent to intimidate anyone, just one phone call, then one email, then a casual coffee meeting. No one knew that Caleb's driver had already recorded the license plate of the group that humiliated Amber. And no one imagined Caleb could find their identities, workplaces, and connections within 3 days. No warnings, no threatening messages. Instead, an anonymous complaint was sent to the restaurant's top management, clearly citing harassment of an employee, backed with internal security footage. A second copy was forwarded to the ethics committee of the service industry, the body overseeing labor rights. A video clip of the incident, source unknown, quietly began circulating among service worker forums, then slowly further. Within a week, several blogs dedicated to exposing toxic social behavior picked it up. One article was titled, "Why Do Rich Men Think Throwing Drinks at People is Entertainment?" It drew hundreds of comments, then thousands. The local news station began investigating. A short segment aired during off-peak hours, but it was more than enough to spark attention. At the restaurant where Amber worked, the atmosphere suddenly grew tense. Management called her in for a private meeting, their tone softer than usual, checking on her, concerned, asking if she was okay and if she wanted to file a formal complaint. Amber was confused. She didn't understand why. Up until now, she believed she simply had to endure, just like all the other times. But this time, something was different. Then, one late weekend afternoon, as Amber was changing out of her uniform in the staff room, she saw the news on the wall-mounted TV. Group of young businessmen faces backlash over mistreatment of waitress at upscale restaurant. Amid public pressure, their representative has issued a formal apology and pledged to reassess their conduct in public spaces. Alongside it was a blurry video, capturing the exact moment the drink was thrown at her. She didn't know who filmed it or who posted it, but for the first time in her life, she watched the guilty be forced to apologize. She wasn't the only one. Several restaurant staff paused in front of the TV, silently watching, then slowly turned to look at Amber. And for the first time, their eyes were not indifferent. Amber stood still. In that moment, she didn't feel triumphant. She just felt lighter. So light it almost felt unreal. She still had no idea what had happened behind the scenes. Who started it? Who escalated it? But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that, for the first time, she wasn't forced into silence. Meanwhile, in a quiet office in the Southern District, inside an unmarked building, Caleb Vaughn sat before a computer, rewatching the now viral clip. He didn't hit like, didn't comment. He simply closed the screen, took a slow sip of espresso, and returned to the planning board for his new logistics company. Life carried on as usual. No one knew he had anything to do with it. And he didn't need them to. Because some things, when done right, don't need a name. Don't need applause. They just need the person who deserved protection. To no longer be left standing alone. In the days after the video spread, Amber continued her work as always. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She just wanted peace, a stable job, and to go home quietly every night. But something in her had changed. Just slightly, like a blade of grass lifting after a storm. She no longer avoided people's eyes. No longer shrank back whenever a customer spoke harshly. She started joining activities after work, like volunteering for programs that helped the homeless. She didn't have much money, but she still spent a few hours each week handing out food, folding blankets, helping set up the supply stations. To Amber, those evenings brought peace. No one there asked what her job was. No one cared whether her shoes were real or fake. There were only people, genuinely human, helping one another simply because they understood what it meant to go without. And one quiet Saturday afternoon, as Amber was carrying a box of bread to the distribution van, she saw him. A matte black SUV pulled up by the curb. The window lowered slowly, and the man who stepped out made Amber freeze for a fraction of a second. The same tall frame, the same deep-toned coat, shirt sleeves casually rolled up, revealing full-sleeve tattoos, black hair streaked with silver, a stern face, and eyes so deep they seemed to see through a person in a single glance. Amber instinctively took one step back, every instinct in her pulling tight. That man looked exactly like the kind of figure her mother used to warn her about when she was little. If you ever see someone covered in tattoos, stepping out of a black car, stay as far away as possible. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't a volunteer. And seeing how the event staff lowered their heads when he approached, Amber guessed. He was the primary sponsor. She lowered her gaze, avoiding his eyes, pretending to rearrange the crates of water, praying he wouldn't notice her. But just as she turned away, a voice spoke behind her, low, steady, warm. "It's you, isn't it?" Amber startled and turned around. He was standing there, not far, looking at her as if he'd known her for years. Her face, bare, sweaty, hair tied up in a hurry, yet he recognized her instantly. "You were the waitress that night." Not a question, a statement. Amber faltered. "You recognize me?" Caleb nodded. Hard to forget. Her breath caught for a moment. She didn't know what to say, didn't know whether to feel relieved, afraid, or walk away. She glanced up again, and for the first time she noticed something. His eyes were nothing like the cold exterior suggested. They were quiet, deep, and gentle. I've been volunteering here for a few weeks," Amber spoke first, after a few steadying heartbeats. "And you're the sponsor?" Caleb gave a faint smile. "I only provide the money. The real work, people like you are doing." She let out a small, awkward laugh. She hadn't expected someone like him to be humble. Hadn't expected him to speak so gently. They stood side by side for a while, neither in a rush to leave. Amber talked about long shifts, freezing nights spent serving on outdoor terraces, nights so exhausting she couldn't feel her legs. Caleb didn't say much, he just listened. But every time she mentioned something painful, his eyes tightened ever so slightly. as if quietly holding back anger on her behalf. For the first time, Amber felt truly heard. No interruptions. No judgment. No pity. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what exactly he did. But in this moment, it didn't matter. All she knew was that this man, who looked like someone to be feared, had a warmer heart than many of those in polished suits. As the sun began to dip, Caleb noticed his driver had been waiting for quite a while. He turned to her and asked softly, "You volunteer here often?" "Every week," Amber nodded. "I don't have money, but I have time and hands. Helping a little is still something." Caleb smiled, a genuine smile. Not practiced, not probing. "Then I suppose we'll meet again." She looked at him, hesitating for a brief moment before smiling back. "That depends on you." He didn't answer, just stepped into the car, the window quietly rolling up. Before the SUV pulled away, she saw his eyes through the glass, the same gaze. Calm, unhurried, but intent. And she remained there on the sidewalk, heart beating faster than usual. Not from fear anymore, but from the strange feeling that someone had truly seen her. Ever since that unexpected encounter at the charity event, Amber found herself quietly aware of Caleb. Though she never showed it. He never left a number, never scheduled anything. Yet every weekend he appeared. On time, in the same place, never explaining, never intruding. By the third time they crossed paths, Amber was arranging packets of cookies at the distribution table when Caleb approached and tilted his head slightly. "When we're done here, would you have time for a coffee?" Amber looked at him for a moment. In those few seconds, a storm of thoughts raced through her mind. The way people might stare, the gap in status, the rumors about him. But then she remembered the way he had listened, that calm voice, those eyes with no judgment. "Just coffee?" "Just coffee," he nodded. "My treat, but you pick the place." Amber let out a small smile. "Then it has to be somewhere without fancy tablecloths, no pretentious vibe, and where the staff doesn't have to wear white uniforms." "Deal." Caleb smiled. "I'll follow your lead." The cafe was small, tucked at a street corner. Old wooden tables, chairs slightly uneven, black and white photos of the city from the 80s hanging on the walls. Amber chose a seat by the window, where the sunlight slanted across her shoulder, casting a soft glow over her light chestnut hair. Caleb sat across from her, coat off, tattoos still visible along his forearms. He was still the same, quiet, solid, and carrying a certain danger. But Amber wasn't afraid anymore. Or if she was, it was a strange kind of fear, like standing at the edge of the ocean at night, vast, deep, and impossible to predict. The coffee arrived. Neither of them reached for it yet. "What line of work are you in?" Amber asked, curious but cautious. "Logistics," Caleb replied. "Supply chains, transport, warehousing, the kind of things nobody sees but everyone relies on." Amber nodded slowly. "Sounds fitting for you." "What makes you say that?" he asked, faintly amused. "You seem like the kind of person who prefers to stay behind the scenes, quiet, but in control of everything." Caleb actually laughed, genuinely, for the first time since they met. "Not wrong, but I wasn't born there." Amber blinked, surprised. Caleb went silent for a few seconds, then spoke, voice steady. "Real? I was in juvenile detention at 21, theft and disorderly conduct. No guidance, no money, no future." Amber froze for a moment. She studied him, but there was no pride in his voice, no self-pity either. Just truth, told as if it belonged to someone else. "A few years after getting out, I worked as a truck driver for a logistics company. Learned how the system worked, saved what I could, studied, then started my own small company. It grew from there." She didn't press for more, and he didn't embellish it. But from the way he paused, the way he chose his words, Amber understood. He had walked through a lot of darkness to reach this point. "What about you?" Caleb asked. Amber rested her chin on her hand, eyes drifting toward the street. "My father died in a car accident when I was in high school. My mother passed from cancer 2 years later. Since then, I've been on my own." Caleb didn't respond right away. He only looked at her, as if he wanted to carry all that loss himself. "I've been a waitress for almost 4 years now. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I just endure it to keep going." "Do you have a dream?" Amber smiled faintly. "I want to open a small bakery, sell fresh bread, cookies, and black coffee, on a quiet street corner, open every morning, play soft music, and see people smile at the first bite." Caleb listened intently. He didn't laugh, but his eyes made it clear. He believed that dream. Their coffee ended as the sky turned darker. Before they parted, Caleb said just one thing. "If you ever have more free time, I'd like to hear more about that bakery." Amber looked at him, a little surprised, then nodded. "I will, But next time, you have to tell me about your tattoos." Caleb smirked. "Deal." They said goodbye. No rush, no promises. But this time, both knew they would see each other again. Amber kept her promise. She told Caleb more about her dream bakery the next time they met, over the sound of spoon against porcelain and the warm amber glow of the little corner cafe. She talked more than she ever had. She laughed more than she remembered laughing in years. And she forgot, for a moment, that there was a time she once feared the ink trailing down his wrist. But good things never last long, especially when someone starts to feel happy. The first rumor reached her after a shift, while changing uniforms in the staff room. A new waitress, barely a few weeks in, whispering to another, heard that Caleb Vaughn guy was tied to the old Mafia, laundering money through transport companies. Seriously? He does look like someone with shady business. Rich with no one knowing where it came from. Suspicious as hell. Amber said nothing. She kept folding her apron, but her heartbeat quietly dipped. She told herself it was nonsense, petty jealousy because she'd been seen with someone different. But then she heard more, from other places. An old acquaintance texted, "Be careful with Vaughn, he's not clean." A coworker even said it to her face, "You should keep your distance. Men like that don't care about people for no reason." Amber didn't know who to believe. But the more she heard, the more tangled her mind became. Images of Caleb, the tattooed hands, the cold eyes, the strange coded phone calls began replaying in her head in a different light. And so, she chose the safest path. Distance. She stopped replying to his messages, skipped the weekend volunteer shift, and when Caleb finally sent a short, simple text, "You okay?" she read it and left it unanswered. Caleb never followed up. No calls, no questions. He let her choose. Almost 2 weeks passed. Amber finished a late shift one night. She took the shortcut through the narrow alley, the path she used when she wanted to avoid the world's gaze. But this time, 2 unfamiliar men were there. They didn't do anything at first, just followed, slowly closing the distance. Then one of them called out, voice low and mocking. "Hey, sweetheart, walking alone out here? It's late, you know." Amber quickened her pace, heart pounding. She didn't answer, but their footsteps behind her sped up too. "Relax, just want to talk. We're not beggars. You work at that fancy restaurant, yeah? A little broke, but damn, you look good." Amber broke into a full run, no hesitation now. She didn't care about the bag she dropped. But before she got even 10 steps, tires screeched. A matte black SUV blocked the alley entrance. The door swung open, and a familiar voice cut through the night, calm, cold, absolute, "Leave." The 2 men froze. Caleb didn't say it twice. He simply took 1 step forward, eyes unchanged, and that alone sent them fleeing like cornered rats. Amber stood trembling, not from fear this time, but shock. She had never seen anyone appear that fast, that precisely, right when she needed it most. Caleb didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He simply picked up the bag she had dropped and held it out to her. I have someone watching the route you usually take, just in case you ever got into trouble." Amber opened her mouth to ask, "Why?" But the answer was already there, in his eyes, "Because I would never abandon you, even if you chose to walk away from me." Caleb drove her all the way to her apartment. He didn't say a word the entire ride. Only when the car finally stopped did he speak, softly. "I know you heard things. I don't blame you." Amber looked at him. She wanted to ask everything. What was true? What was rumor? Who was he, really? But in that moment, only one sentence made it out of her lips. "Thank you for not leaving me there." Caleb nodded, a movement so light it was almost a breath. "You don't have to trust what people say. Just pay attention to how they treat you." And with that, he drove off. No waiting. No demand for answers. Amber stood there, watching the black SUV fade into the night, heart tangled and unsteady. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of his gaze. She was afraid she might have misjudged his heart. 3 days after the night Caleb pulled her from that alley, Amber still couldn't shake the look in his eyes. Not angry, not accusing, just quietly hurt. She had been afraid. She had doubted him. But the way he appeared exactly when she needed him, not to prove anything, not to be seen, but simply to protect her from a danger so small no one else even noticed, completely unraveled something inside her. Amber couldn't sleep properly, couldn't pretend nothing had changed. She didn't know exactly what she wanted, but she knew one thing for certain. She needed to hear from him. Honestly. Just once. That evening the sky was shifting gray. A light rain had left the city damp and cool. Amber stood in front of the glass doors of the logistics HQ by the port, the building where Caleb ran his operation. She hadn't scheduled anything. She only sent one short text. "I want to hear you speak. If possible, I'm downstairs." Less than 10 minutes later, Caleb appeared in the lobby, shirt sleeves still rolled, expression as calm as ever. But when he saw her, his eyes softened. Without a word, he led her to the top floor. The office was wide, all glass, overlooking the port, where lines of container trucks moved like the veins of some massive organism. Amber sat down before her knees could weaken. Caleb didn't ask, "What do you want?" Didn't circle around anything. He simply poured her a glass of water, then sat across from her. "You want to know about me," he said plainly. "Then ask. I won't avoid it." Amber's fingers tightened, but she took a breath and met his eyes. "Are the things people say about you true?" Caleb nodded slightly. "Some of it." He paused, then continued. "No deflection, no excuse. I've worked with people who weren't clean, took money off the record, opened companies under borrowed names. That was early on, when I was just trying to survive in a world that had no place for a man with no name and no background." Amber stayed silent, listening, not interrupting. "But 3 years ago, I cut every tie with anything illegal. I rebuilt everything. A legal company, full taxes, quarterly audits. I refused to live the rest of my life constantly looking over my shoulder." He looked at her directly, unwavering. "I know my past isn't easy to forgive. I don't deny it, and I won't force anyone to accept it." Caleb rested his hand lightly on the table, not reaching for her, not crossing any line, simply opening himself. "I don't want you to be afraid, and I don't want you to think I see you as someone who needs to be saved or protected. You're stronger than most people I've met, but if you'll allow it, I want to walk beside you." Amber looked at him for a long time, all the rumors, the warnings, the doubt. And here, right in front of her, was a man stripping himself bare with quiet honesty, offering no excuses, no dramatic apologies, no manipulative explanations. Just clarity, who he was and who he had chosen to become. Amber remembered everything she had seen. How he restored her dignity without ever asking for credit. How he didn't push her to believe him. How he stepped between her and danger in that dark alley without asking for gratitude. And she realized, in a city where everyone wore a mask to survive, Caleb, with all his ink, his tangled past, and his solitude, was the most honest person she had ever met. "You don't need my forgiveness," Amber said slowly, "because you've never wronged me." Caleb said nothing. "I used to be afraid of you, terrified even, but not because you were dangerous. I was afraid of trusting the wrong person. I've spent my life being left behind." She held his gaze. "But you never left me, even when I walked away first." Caleb stayed silent, but his fingers curled slightly against the table as if holding back something overwhelming. Amber smiled, soft but certain. "So if you still want to walk with me, I won't run from you anymore." There was a brief stillness. Then Caleb nodded, barely, but it was the kind of nod from a man who had held his composure his entire life, and finally, quietly allowed himself to breathe. They didn't kiss. They didn't embrace like in the movies. They simply sat there, two people from two different worlds, both scarred, both lost, both once afraid of themselves, now finally facing the same direction. No one knew what lay ahead, but this time, they would begin together. Life often makes us meet the right person at the wrong time, or makes us misunderstand the right one. Amber once thought Caleb was danger, distance, a world that could never be hers. But in the end, what frightened her wasn't his past. It was her own prejudice. Because in a society where so many wear masks to hide what's ugly, sometimes the person who looks the scariest is actually the most sincere. What about you? Have you ever misjudged someone because of their past, their appearance, or a rumor you'd heard? Share your story in the comments. I would love to hear it. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes about people, about choices, and about the small things that can change a life completely. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next video.